Probably most people, I think, have heard Marty before. This is, I think, your fourth talk here with us in the last year or so. We love you. We love the conversations and the topics that you bring up. We don't quite know what you can talk about, but every time you say, well, I could talk about this, we go, yes. So this morning, he's going to talk about, maybe some of you remember, he came and talked about Rawls, the philosopher, not the singer. And I also thought Lou Rawls sang the wrong song, Me and Mrs. Jones, and it wasn't. But no, it's John Rawls. John Rawls. And we got introduced to a theory of justice. There were a number of us that admitted to each other that we had never heard of Rawls before. And now we're going to get walked through what would Rawls say about what Eric Snowden has done. So that's our talk for this morning. Let me just introduce Marty as, let's see, sorry, that's right, not all of your presentations have involved Rawls. In his third presentation of Rawls' work to HCSV, Marty Carcieri, who is an associate professor of political science at San Francisco State University, will present Rawls' theory of civil disobedience and apply it to the case of Edward Snowden. Join me in welcoming Marty Carcieri.
Handouts.
Here we go. Oh, good, there they are. Okay, so the handouts have not been distributed yet. Okay, all right. That's okay. I'm glad. I appreciate you. Okay, yeah. Let's distribute those, and then beautiful, and then the hypo. Good. Okay. All right. Whew. Hi, everyone. This is a lot of what teaching is improvising on the spot. I didn't know where the handouts were. I didn't know if they were going to get distributed. So, okay. It's great to be back with you once again. I appreciate it very much. As Laura said, this is my fourth presentation here. And of course, I see folks like Laura and Martin and Claudia up at Bay Area Humanists, which is really thriving now. You should check us out sometime. We do stuff almost every weekend now. We have a book group now. We have a volunteering sector. We do volunteering once a month as well. We have a roundtable discussion once a month as well. So we're doing stuff most Saturdays, and we always have an outing at some point each month as well. So anyway, it's good to be among humanists. Now, yeah, the last couple times I've come, I've spoken on John Rawls, the American political philosopher generally, and I think the second time I came, the last time I was here, I presented on Rawls and the Right to Die. I'm happy to say I've gotten a book contract to write a book about Rawls, and I'm heavily involved with that right now. But what the presentation that I'm going to give today grew out of was a writing exercise that I developed for a class that I taught this past semester in American political theory at San Francisco State University. I thought, well, this case of Edward Snowden is pretty interesting. It looks to me like it's a close call in terms of civil disobedience, so let me torture my students and have a hypothetical along these lines and then a suggested analysis applying John Rawls's principles of civil disobedience to the case of Edward Snowden. So what I'd like to do today is to put Rawls's theory of civil disobedience in front of you and then distribute the factual hypo, just a two-page hypothetical on the facts of Edward Snowden. And then if we've got enough time to work through it a little bit, and then I've got the analysis that I gave to my students as well. So I hope you enjoy it. Now, Laura suggested quite sensibly that I distribute all the materials at the outset so that people know in advance everything that I'm doing. But my thought was that let's work through it together. Let's see what we come up with, right? Because again, I'm going to say at the outset, I don't think that the case of Edward Snowden is a slam dunk one way or the other. It's a tough, close call. There are strong considerations on both sides for punishing this guy versus letting him go. So we'll get part of the way into that. I also want to make sure that I say that what I'm going to present to you today is not an exhaustive analysis of this problem by any means. You could probably write a whole book just on the civil disobedience implications of Edward Snowden. And the facts, as you well know, are still unfolding. So this is a bit of a snapshot. And again, what this was simply an exercise I did with my students for one writing exercise this past semester. So I wanted to make sure that I appropriately qualify the scope of anything that I'm trying to do here. So I hope you remember with the hypo that was just distributed. I came a couple times ago and presented the basics of Rawls' two principles of justice that he says we would agree to, all of us, from behind a veil of ignorance. You know, you see the question there at the top of the page. The question that Rawls asked as a great philosopher was, what would rational, self-interested individuals, equally situated behind a veil of ignorance about the details of their own lives, agree to as the basic principles and institutions by which they'll be governed forever once they know the details of their lives? And again, I took the time to try to explain why that's a pretty good question, I think, because this question is being asked in an initial situation of fairness. Nobody knows in advance who they're going to be. You know you're going to show up as somebody, some human being or other. All of us know that we're going to wind up somewhere in that vast range of natural and social advantages and disadvantages. You just don't know where. So if you knew you were going to be a human being, but you didn't know where you were going to wind up, what basic principles of justice would you agree to? Would you and I rationally agree to from behind that veil of ignorance? And Rawls argues for the two principles that you have here, the two principles of justice. Number one, each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. So this is a liberal theory. The emphasis is on liberty. Liberty, obviously, can be limited in the interest of protecting us from each other, so nobody thinks liberty is absolute. But Rawls makes it clear that the presumption is in favor of liberty. The most basic rule you and I would agree to is that each person has the most extensive system of equal basic liberties compatible with the like system for others. So we start there. Secondly, with respect to inequalities, and Rawls, once again, be very, very clear, he's sometimes called a socialist. That could not be further from the truth. He's anything but a socialist. He is a liberal. He's in the middle. Granted, center-left. But he recognizes that there are going to be, in the nature of things, there are going to be social and economic inequalities in society. Some people are just going to be born into luckier circumstances than others, families that are loving and functional and wealthy enough to give them what they need, and other people are going to be born into other circumstances. There will be social and economic inequality. But of course, we preserve political and legal equality to the extent that we can, but there will be social and economic inequality. So given that, he says, second principle, he says, you and I would agree to, from behind the veil of ignorance, social and economic inequalities are to satisfy two conditions. First, they are to be attached to positions and offices open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. Not just formal equality of opportunity, but fair equality of opportunity. We're committing ourselves to the resources to give every person a chance, no guarantee, but a chance to compete in life. And I assume that that would include substantial resources, collective resources devoted to public education, public health. I think not only Obamacare, but a single-payer system would be derivable from Rawls. So I think that's what we're talking about, but he left it to folks like me to sort this out. He was just a genius who laid out the theory. So fair equality of opportunity, and second, any inequalities in the system are to be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. And he defines least advantaged in terms of wealth and income. That's called the difference principle. Any inequalities in society are to work to the advantage of the least advantaged in society. So, for example, we might provide particular tax breaks for the least wealthy, right? Earned income tax credit, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is what Rawls says, the two basic principles of justice. And he takes 500 pages, by the way, in his great book, A Theory of Justice, to lay all this out. So I'm hoping you remember that. I presented that in more detail a couple times ago when I came. And again, these are principles designed for a reasonably just society. A reasonably just society. If anyone makes the assumption that humanity is always in a state of war with respect to each other, none of this stuff is going to work, right? We're making the assumption that human beings have the capacity, collectively, to live under some form of constitutional democracy. to live in a civil society of some sort, right? A reasonably just society. We're not talking about perfection. That's never the standard with human beings, is it? No. Reasonably just society, one in which, for the most part, most of the time, people are following the rules and not violating each other's rights, right? If that's not possible, then civilization is not possible, and the fact that we've made it this far seems to disprove that. We humans are animals, but we do have the capacity for cooperation. So we do the best we can and under an imperfect situation, and so these are the rules of a reasonably just society. And yet, as you all know, in this world, you've got to deal with questions of injustice sometimes. Even a society that has the most just and fair internal rules is subject to being conquered by some more warlike state. So you've got to have a military. Moreover, even a reasonably just society is going to have the need for the rule of law to protect us from each other, both criminally and civilly. We will have to have a criminal justice system, even in a reasonably just society. So Rawls is aware of all that. He says, you know, there's these principles on the one hand for a reasonably just society, which he calls, that's the realm of ideal theory, a reasonably just society. But what about the situations in which you have injustice? That's the realm of non-ideal theory. And here we're talking about questions of revolution, just war, conscientious objection, civil disobedience, militancy, and so forth. So we have to deal with all of that as well, and Rawls took this on in his book, Theory of Justice. So what he does, among other things, is to build on top of, with respect to civil disobedience, which is on the second side of the handout. I want to get into that now. Civil disobedience, this is one of the questions that comes up when we have to deal with the fact of injustice. What do we do about the fact that sometimes even a reasonably just government will do unjust things? That's a given. Sometimes it's going to happen. And the question is, from the viewpoint of non-ideal theory, civil disobedience, it's not what rules should government abide by. Those have been violated. The question now is, what is the individual citizen allowed to do? That's the question. With respect to civil disobedience, what am I, as an individual citizen, confronted with injustice by my country? What am I allowed to do? Can I just start shooting people? There's injustice. Can't I react? Well, so Rawls is building on the foundation of people like Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, the American philosopher of the 19th century, who had something to say about. He was a smart troublemaker, I might say. He was better at asking questions than giving answers, like Rawls. But then you got great figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And Rawls is building his theory of civil disobedience on top of what they had to say. So on the second, on page side 2 of the handout that you just got, which everybody I hope has in front of you, see it says the definition, justification, and role of civil disobedience. So let's take a look at this. This is how Rawls works it up, and these are the principles and rules that he suggests for civil disobedience. So the first two premises, you see I have the thesis and antithesis there. We start with those two contradictory premises, and I take it for granted that we would all pretty much agree with both of those. On the one hand, you and I have a presumptive moral duty to obey the law, not an absolute moral duty, but a presumptive moral duty to obey the law. And I'm not talking about a legal duty to obey the law. That goes by definition. By definition, you and I have a legal duty to obey the law. That's easy. The question, the more interesting question is, do you and I have an underlying moral duty to obey the law? And Rawls and others have said, well, presumptively, the rule is, as a rule, you and I have a moral obligation to obey the law. Does anybody dispute that? I want to suggest to you, I think the reason why, I know the reason why I agree with this, and I suspect a lot of you would agree with it, is quite simply the following. Every day you and I go out of our house, we are counting on other people to obey the law, right? Every day you and I go out of our house, we are counting on other people to obey the law, right? I think so. Otherwise, you and I would not even leave the house, or if we did, we would always go out heavily armed. And we would never trust anybody. I'd never turn my back on anybody. I would never assume that cars are going to obey the traffic laws, right? So I want to suggest to you, if we're honest, you and I count on other people all the time, all day long, to follow the law. We take precautions We're not idiots, but you and I count on other people, for the most part, to obey the law. Therefore, you and I have an obligation to do the same thing. That's where we start. Presumptive moral duty to obey the law. On the other hand, as you know, people like Gandhi and King wrote that we have a presumptive moral duty to disobey unjust laws. So right off the bat, we're in the soup here, right? What do? You got conflicting moral imperatives here. So there we start. There's the crux of it. Well, Rawls, in the third claim there, the next antithesis, the next step up in the dialectic, says, okay, here's the next step. And as I write it out there, I'm paraphrasing Rawls, where the normal means of legal reform in a constitutional democracy are available, we have a presumptive moral duty to work for change through them. So that's a pretty good response, right? Rawls says, okay, we start with thesis and antithesis. We have presumptive moral duty to obey the law, but we have a presumptive moral duty to disobey unjust laws. What do? Okay? You look at the legal system under which you're living. And if that system especially has constitutional guarantees of freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of association, the right to vote in free, fair, regular elections, an open society in some sense, then the normal means of legal reform in a constitutional democracy are available, and you and I have an obligation to work through them. You can't just start shooting people. If you have the features of a constitutional democracy that give you and me the power to resist unjust laws within the bounds of law, we have a presumptive moral duty to do that. Now, Thoreau wasn't happy with that. Thoreau was a bit of a crank. He was a brilliant guy, but I'm not impressed by smart people anymore. He says, look, my life is too short. I'm not on this planet to save society, you know. If I find that my government is acting unjustly, I'm entitled to break the law forthwith. Okay. Well, Rawls thought it through a little bit further than that. And again, to his credit, Thoreau was just writing a short essay. Rawls was working out a theory for 20 years, right? So Rawls says, the way I sum it up, and I'm bringing a lot of stuff together here from the chapters on civil disobedience, but you see my number 4 there, the synthesis of all this. Here's the bottom line, and I've said it as well as I can. If the right to resist the law is still claimed, even with the normal means of legal reform available, right? If an individual still claims the right to resist the law, to violate the law, then, since civil disobedience is resistance to law within the bounds of fidelity to law. That's a brilliant turn of phrase. That's Rawls' own phrase. Civil disobedience is resistance to law within the bounds of fidelity to law, or fidelity to justice, right? I'm resisting the law based on a higher conception of justice. So he says, civil disobedience is resistance to law within the bounds of fidelity to law. This is not just militancy where I'm just doing whatever. I'm trying to also, as he says, civil disobedience also is an appeal to the majority's sense of justice. Very important to understand. In a constitutional democracy, the premise would be, if I resist the law and do it in a way that other people know about, I'm appealing to the majority's conscience. And think about it, this is exactly what the civil rights movement did. This is what Dr. King was doing, and he did it pretty effectively. He had the sense that there was enough of a moral consensus in the United States that blatant segregation is wrong. He was appealing to the majority's sense of justice, you see? So that's what we're trying to do with civil disobedience. So I'm condensing a lot here, but this is the crux of what he has to say. So, if the right to resist the law is still claimed, you still claim the right to violate the law, then since civil disobedience is resistance to law within the bounds of fidelity to law and is an appeal to the majority's sense of justice, then resistance to law, violation of the law, can be defined as civil disobedience and claim its moral legitimacy only if the next 5 criteria are met. A, legal means of reform have been attempted and are pointless. You can easily imagine a situation like that. Edward Snowden was arguably in that position. Second, the equal liberty and or fair equality of opportunity principle is substantially violated by government. I'll come back to that. Third, the resistance is performed publicly. You violate the law. To have the integrity of civil disobedience, rather than mere militancy, secretly violating the law, to have the moral legitimacy of civil disobedience, your violation of law must be done publicly and with a willingness to accept the punishment. Dr. King was crystal clear about that, wasn't he? Okay? Next, the resistance is performed non-violently. And I don't even need to justify that, right? That's justifiable on moral grounds as well as practical grounds. Just as a practical matter, you engage in violent violation of law, you're not going to get many adherents. You go to violence, you're really making it tougher for yourself to cast yourself on the moral high ground, once you get violent. Finally, for Rawls, he says, the resistance is performed politically. And what that means is it's done for political reasons, not, for example, religious reasons. Some people have resisted government laws based on religious scruples. That's fine, but that's not what Rawls is talking about. Within the context of a civil society, we're talking about political reasons rather than religious reasons for resisting the law. So that's the crux of it right there. Now, you notice I included some other key comments and cautions. You know, this is a narrow definition of civil disobedience and is traditional. Again, this is an example of a principle for individuals. These rules of civil disobedience. These are not for government. I want to be very clear about this, you know. Government is supposed to follow the rules on the other side. Equal basic liberties, fair equality of opportunity, that's principles for institutions. Government institutions are to follow those rules, but when they don't, the question becomes, what can I as a citizen do to resist the law? And that's the domain that we're in today with civil disobedience. So, okay. So again, this is an example of a principle, these rules for civil disobedience that Rawls has laid out. Principle for individuals to which those behind the veil of ignorance would agree as a rational way to stabilize a just constitution. See, you can have a basically just constitution even if you've got a corrupt particular Congress, or a particular law. That's quite possible, isn't it? A basically just constitutional system that occasionally produces a manifestly unjust law. That's the kind of situation Rawls is looking at here. Okay, let's see. Okay, a couple other conditions there as well. So, okay. So, again, the point is, Rawls is arguing, when you violate the law, you can expect to have the respect of people, you can expect to have moral legitimacy in violating the law only if you follow these criteria. Otherwise, for example, if you violate the law secretly, that's called militancy. Rawls calls that militancy. And that is, I suggest to you, a lot harder to justify in moral terms, right? Now, sometimes it can be. Think of the Underground Railroad in the 19th century, which helped escaped slaves get up to free states in the north and up to Canada, right? They violated the law secretly, and clearly they were morally justified in doing so, weren't they? Please notice, though, at that point, we'd be hard-pressed to say that, with respect to the slaves, there was a constitutional democracy, right? So you've really departed at that point. The reason why the Underground Railroad can be justified in their militancy is because they were reacting to a system in which the relationship between the slaves and government, both state and national government, was not one of government to citizen. It was one of oppressor to oppressed. Okay, so the question comes up then, with respect to Edward Snowden, what do we do about that guy? So, let me give you the facts that I distributed, that I put together for my students. It took a while to put this together, but thank you, Martin. I wanted to make sure, here's one thing I've learned teaching for decades. If you want good work out of the students, you've got to give them something good to work with, right? And so I had to work to put together the relevant facts and law with respect to Edward Snowden before I could expect them to do an analysis of it that would be you know, a useful one and a valuable exercise. So if I may, usually it's death to read it, people, you know, but you can look at this in some other time. I'm not sure what to do here. Maybe just hit some of the high points. Do you see in general, first of all, does everybody have the handout now, by the way? A couple more folks. Now my blood, sweat, and tears right here. Okay, so you see what I do here. I've got legal background 1, then the factual background, legal background 2, and then the factual background 2. So as I was putting this together, again, think what I was trying to do here was, did we run out? We got enough? Yeah, we got a few more back there. Again, I had to give the students the relevant information that they needed to be able to sort out Snowden's situation in terms of the rules of civil disobedience that Rawls had just laid out. Okay? So I start off, from my reading, doing some research on this. This problem goes back to 9/11 and the Patriot Act, which expanded the authority of the national government to collect information, hence the NSA, hence 30,000 people at the NSA, hence a vast private structure that supports that, and NSA co-opting Apple, Facebook, and so forth. Okay. I say something about Fourth Amendment interests there, which Congress recognized, so they created the FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which requires the NSA to obtain permission from a specialized closed-session FISA court before it can conduct a targeted search of a particular individual's records. So there's some apparatus there, to protect us, but of course that's been reformed a little bit in the wake of Snowden's revelations. Okay, so that's the first legal background. Factual background: enter Edward Snowden, a former CIA specialist in info technology security. He was hired by Booz Allen Hamilton. He came into possession of a lot of these classified documents, and he concluded that Americans were not only in the dark about what the NSA was doing, but they were being actively misled. So he took possession of tens of thousands of copies of these classified NSA files, flew to Hong Kong, met with journalists, gave them copies of those documents, and you know the rest. He's now hanging out under a visa in Russia while he waits to see what's going to happen. Now let's see. At the bottom, legal background 2, the U.S. has charged Snowden with violation of the Espionage Act, which goes back a century, by the way. This was applied in World War I, the Espionage Act. Bans unauthorized communication of national defense information, will communication, etc. And then I lay out the U.S.'s initial position. And again, folks, I'm sure a sophisticated group like this already knows that this is not a slam dunk. The U.S. is on pretty solid ground in a lot of ways in going after Edward Snowden. Here's the case, I think, the basic case the U.S. has. Very bottom of the front page under legal background 2. First of all governments are allowed to keep secrets. Indeed, China, Russia, and other countries have similar programs to the NSA's. The NSA just does it better and on a grander scale than any other country. Second, the NSA has not clearly violated any current laws, at least as any court has identified. Third, although few Americans knew the nature and extent of the NSA's activities before Snowden's disclosures, Congress and the President knew these facts all along, thus legitimating them in terms of Madisonian republicanism. We had already covered that in this class. Under Madisonian republicanism, you have a republic so long as the people who are in charge have either been selected directly by the voters or indirectly by them. So, for example, you and I don't choose who's on the U.S. Supreme Court, but we elect the President and we elect the Senate, and they decide who's on the Supreme Court. Therefore, even though it's not a direct democratic procedure, it's a Republican procedure. So under Madisonian republicanism, the President and Congress knew about this. The U.S. is on pretty strong ground. Fourth, much of the NSA's focus is on overseas communications, and the Fourth Amendment, ban on unreasonable search and seizure, does not protect the communications of non-citizens overseas. Fifth, Snowden has arguably harmed several U.S. interests, and then I lay out a number of those. So, next paragraph, the Whistleblower Protection Act protects federal employees' disclosures of violation of law, etc. Members of the intelligence community, however, are not covered by the WPA, but by the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act. But so far as I could tell, and very complex, and I could not put everything, obviously, into a hypothetical for my students, but as far as I could tell, this law requires a whistleblower to make his disclosure either to the Inspector General, right? Not to go public with it, right? If you're a whistleblower, you go to the Inspector General, an executive branch official, or to a member of Congress, preferably some ranking member or chair on some big relevant committee. And this law provides no remedy if a governmental agency retaliates against that whistleblower. This has happened many times, and some of you, no doubt, know this better than I do. Some of my students wanted to get out of this very easily and just said, well, he was protected by the law, he should have just gone that way. I don't think it's that easy. So, factual background 2, Snowden, and I quote him here, his stated motive for his actions was informing the public about what is being done to them and in their name. Present and future generations of U.S. citizens should know what their government is doing, and they should be the ones to judge whether it's right. He also wanted other technologists to know the truth so that they can invent new ways to protect you and me. Finally, he explained, for what this is worth, that rather than publicizing the documents himself, he gave them to journalists since they would be less biased than he in deciding which documents to publicize. Nonetheless, the U.S. State Department has revoked his passport. He's now living in Russia under a one-year visa, and so forth. So, and then I finish up with some of the, this guy's been, he's been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. There's an international team of lawyers working on his behalf for free. He's getting donations of money from all over the world, and a lot of people think he ought to get an amnesty. So I looked at this and I thought, isn't that interesting? What would Rawls do, right? It's the theme of my life. What would Rawls do? What would John Rawls have to say about this? And so I thought that I would lay that out and then see what we might say about how Rawls would look at this. So let's see. Edward Snowden signed a contract saying he would not disclose the classified information into which he comes with contact. He violated that. He breached that contract, so he violated the law. So he has a presumptive moral duty to obey the law, but he violated that on the premise that he has a presumptive moral duty to disobey unjust laws, or at least resist an unjust government, right? So we start there. In terms of the Rawlsian analysis, the next question that arises is, were the normal means of legal reform in a constitutional democracy available to him? And a second's reflection gives us the answer, yes and no. Right off the bat, it's not a slam dunk, right? On the one hand, yes, there were laws there in place to protect whistleblowers, but again, from the sources that I looked at, the bottom line is that a lot of people who wind up blowing the whistle wind up getting harassed, wind up losing their jobs, wind up losing their whole profession because they went public, because they were a whistleblower. And so it's not so clear that the normal means of legal reform in a constitutional democracy were available. Again, it will not do simply to say, well, if you feel that strongly about it, Snowden, then fall on your sword. You take the hit. If you're going to go public with it, then you've got to agree to go to prison for the next 40 years. I guess I don't think that's the end of the analysis. I guess I don't think it's that easy. So, okay. Anyway, let's go on. Assuming, as I'm arguing, that those normal means of legal reform in a constitutional democracy were not available, did he satisfy the criteria of civil disobedience? Well, again, on the facts, pursuing legal means of reform would have been pointless. He would have probably gotten in trouble himself, and by disclosing it only to the Inspector General or to a member of Congress, what do you think the chances are that this information would have gotten public? Not much. And above all, he wanted to make sure that Americans knew about this. He wanted to publicize it above all. Okay, so I'm going to get past that one. The next question then, in terms of applying Rawls' principles here, is was government violating either the equal liberty or fair equality of opportunity principle? Because again, what that means in effect is that before somebody can violate the law in opposition to government injustice, government has to be committing a serious injustice. Again, a violation either of the equal basic liberties principle or fair equality of opportunity. I look at this situation, I don't see any violations by the NSA of fair equality of opportunity, but I think we can all agree that there's one very basic fundamental liberty that's being violated by the NSA, and it's called privacy. How many people would agree here that privacy, I'm not defining it yet, would be among the basic equal liberties in a constitutional democracy? How many people would say privacy is, even before we define it? So you're with me. So I would say that Snowden at this point is on pretty strong ground because he was reacting to a system that was systematically violating a basic liberty of Americans, privacy. Let's be clear. You and I have no absolute right to privacy. No rights are absolute. But since it's a basic liberty for Rawls, the presumption would be in favor of protecting privacy, such that government needs a damn good reason to invade our privacy. And privacy comes up in many different contexts. So we'd have to talk about those individually. But, you know, snooping on our emails and our telephone calls, there's a certain degree of privacy that we expect there. Anyway, I'm going to say that we can make the case that since government was violating privacy, one of our equal basic liberties, Snowden, on that account, is satisfying the criteria for civil disobedience from Rawls. So we move on. You notice also that he acted non-violently. Yeah, all he did was turn over some files to some journalists. Somebody might say, well, but look, As a result of that, you know, Al-Qaeda might be able to avoid detection and commit some violence that they could not otherwise have committed. Okay, a little speculative. The point is, Snowden did nothing violent. So I would say he's in pretty good shape there. And then also, it appears finally that he did this politically. There's no indication that Snowden did what he did for religious reasons. It looked like, at least by his own words, what he says is, I wanted U.S. citizens to know what their government is doing because they should be the ones to judge whether it's right. I'm going to say that he is within the bounds of political reasons. He's not doing this for religious reasons, so for the most part, Snowden looks like he's on pretty strong ground under Rawls. But obviously the one thing that I've skipped so far that is the kicker is, did he do it publicly? And the answer is yes and no, right? He did it publicly in the sense that as soon as you and I found out what happened, right, that there had been this leak, we knew who did it, Edward Snowden. But he did not do it publicly with a willingness to accept the punishment because he did it from Hong Kong, right? Only once he was out of the U.S.'s reach. So again, that's the kind of thing that I wanted to, again, this is just an exercise for my students. I wanted them to see on that one, it's not a slam dunk. It's a yes and a no. You got to sort that out. The facts indicate, but you can make an argument both ways. Did he do it publicly? Yes and no. Insofar as he clearly was not willing to accept the punishment, I think we have to say that ultimately he did not really comply with Rawlsian principles of civil disobedience. So to me, this is where it really gets interesting. Because again, like I said, so far as I can see, sometimes even militancy, secret lawlessness, can be morally justified. It's not easy, and you really got to get in and make the argument. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of, from here, tell you how I analyze the rest of it. So here's what I have to say about the rest of it, and then I'll throw it open to questions, folks. I know a lot of you have questions. If I would have stopped along the way, I never would have been able to get in front of you basically what I want to get in front of you. Here's the bottom line, the end of my analysis, right? At this point, I've already concluded that even though Snowden complied with most of Rawls' criteria for civil disobedience, in a basic sense, he did not do it publicly with the willingness to accept the punishment. Therefore, what he did is militancy. So the question arises again, can we defend what he did on moral grounds? Well, my take is that we have to look more closely now at the NSA's actions. Okay? So again, I've already mentioned the Underground Railroad, how that's an example of militancy that was nonetheless morally justifiable. By contrast, the NSA, unlike southern states, was enslaving no one. Further, again, governments are allowed to keep some secrets, and it's not even clear the NSA violated the law. The Patriot Act authorized extensive surveillance of electronic records, and the President and Congress knew what was going on. And in addition, China and Russia have programs like this as well. Now, those regimes do not pretend to govern themselves by Rawlsian principles. So to some extent, that's a little bit irrelevant. But it is true that other countries do have programs like the NSA, and so we can't say that the U.S. is evil simply on that account. Okay. Now, the NSA might try to justify its program on grounds that the U.S. is in a state of war with terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, with whom some in the U.S. might be in contact. And yet, beyond the fact that Congress has not declared war against such enemies, the NSA cannot be said to be at war with the millions of Americans on whom it is collecting information, and that is the relationship that matters. It won't do for the NSA to say we're at war. President Bush said we're at war, so we're at war. Well, no, you're not at war with the Americans on whom you're spying, so that won't quite do. To be sure, again, government's allowed to do something secretly, and collecting and storing data is one thing, but sifting through it with respect to a particular individual, that's something else. And under the law, to the extent that it's being followed, the NSA can do that only if it gets permission from a FISA court. Okay? So, yeah. Nonetheless, there's little guarantee that that line could not easily be crossed. This is all done in secret. And again, this is the kind of thing that Snowden was well aware of. And that line could easily be crossed to abuse of that information and abuse of the potential to search that information for particular individuals, especially given the thousands of government and private employees with security clearances, right, that we've already seen under the privatization of the modern security state. And, you know, as for the claim that the NSA's activities are legitimate because Congress and the President knows what they're doing, that kind of begs the question. It kind of assumes what needs to be proven, right? Government can keep some secrets, but not all secrets. And in an open society, a constitutional democracy, we're entitled to know to a great degree what our government's doing. Okay. In fact, Obama's call for new restrictions on the NSA suggests that he knew all along that the NSA was overreaching, and he's now calling for change he would not have called for in the absence of Snowden's disclosure. So right there, again, Snowden is on pretty good ground, even if what he did was militancy. So I say, in conclusion, the only element of civil disobedience Snowden did not satisfy was a willingness to accept the legal punishment for his actions. And even at that, he was not morally required to play into enemy hands, sacrifice the rest of his life in the attempt to do this, right? Indeed, it's hard to fault him for acting secretly when government itself keeps secrets that, when disclosed, shock citizens and lead to calls for reform. Everything I'm reading you, by the way, is on a handout that I'll give you. To be sure, government can keep some secrets, but the kind of secrets the NSA was keeping could easily lead to abuse. Whatever else can be said then, Snowden performed a great public service. He has been nominated for a Nobel Prize. Many think he should receive an amnesty from the US government. This proves little, of course, since if he is not punished, this could set an example for others to do as he did. Again, it's tough. We can't just say let him off the hook. Others will be emboldened to do the same thing. Some would welcome other people coming forth the way that Snowden did, and yet it cannot be the case, I suggest to you, that people can routinely violate the law as Snowden did with impunity. So, assuming he returns to the US and he is tried and found guilty, he should be punished, although only briefly, for no more than a year, to set an example. After that, his lecture and book tour will make him wealthy and will continue to foster the kind of debate about the post-9/11 security state that he's already begun. So any student who wrote that got an A. Okay, folks, what do you say? That's my take. So jump in and thank you. Thank you. Okay, I want to get to everybody, but you know, so maybe I should just start picking people. Okay, I'll work with.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Oh, there we go. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Good. The microphone.
Okay, so I'm going to be walking around with a mic. I have numbers. Those holding hands will get, holding your hands up, not those holding hands. If you hold your hand up, you get a number, and I'll try not to call out numbers. Hold your number so I can see it, and we'll move through the group that way.
God, you guys are so organized down here. We're a mess up there. We just go, that's how you're talking. Anybody who yells the loudest. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of things I'd like you to comment on. First of all, I quarrel with your assessment that he did he did try the legal means of reform. It seems to me he tried them theoretically in his head and said it wouldn't work, but he didn't actually make a serious effort to try that. And the other issue was that I thought that John Rawls maybe should have included some statement about you do the minimum that you need, damage that you need to do in order to prove your point. And Edward Snowden released so many documents that I thought it was kind of overkill and damaged our relationships with other countries.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Well, in the first one, your first point, what do you say exactly Snowden should have done? Just so I understand what your point. What exactly should he have done, and what do you think the result would have been?
Well, I don't actually know what he should have done. I mean, a suggestion might be that he escaped from the country as he did with the documents that he had, and then he call up the Inspector General and say, or whoever it was that he was. Good, good.
That's not bad. I hadn't thought of that. I'm still not sure it would have made any difference. That's a good thought. That's good thinking. That would have been one option. I have to tell you, I don't think the Inspector General would have made the documents public, right? And without that happening, it's hard to say that what Snowden was doing would have had any effect.
He would have tried, and it didn't work. work.
But it would have been pointless, right? It would have been pointless.
But I don't think you can skip point A.
Okay, fair enough. That's a fair critique. I appreciate it. Okay, yes, sir. What do you say?
With regard to your conclusion that the one criterion that Edward Snowden violated was unwillingness to accept punishment for violating the law, I would like to suggest to you that that is still an open question, that he is in the process of continuing to disclose information via the journalists. He's in Russia involuntarily,
right.
And nobody knows yet what his decision will be when his visa to stay in Russia expires.
Right.
He may yet be willing to accept punishment in some form, depending upon what he can negotiate.
Good point, sir. You're right. We don't know that fully. I was simply going by the fact that he did not stick around. Before we knew what happened, he was out of the U.S.'s reach. But your point is very well taken. We don't know how this is going to play out. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, I wonder how you would analyze this problem under the context of what is the responsibilities of duty. You present a very persuasive case here by presenting Rawls' theories of citizenship. But when a person is in duty, such as in the military service, he is not a citizen who has to make moral choices. For example, if a soldier is there and asked to machine gun a crowd coming at him with broken bottles, and it's women and children and men, and he refuses to machine gun them, there's no question that this guy is a traitor.
Yes.
And there's no moral question. Okay, so the question is really in duty. A police officer has different responsibilities and different ways to act than the person who can run through a stop sign.
Yes.
Okay, we make judges of laws all the time as citizens, and we, in your terms, we're not on this planet to serve or save the society, as Thoreau said. And Thoreau was making a disobedience to a civil law as a citizen. Now, so the whole question you could bring in terms of duty, to what extent is this man under duty? Now, a uniformed person, there's no question, is under duty. An FBI does not wear a uniform, but he is under duty. So is the NSA, if under the CIA, is completely duty? The NSA is also a defense organization. I'm not sure how it goes there. And the question is now, he is employed by a contractor working for. So the privatization of the security state is what is under question here, and whether a person is under duty. Sure, I love what Snowden did, you know, and it wouldn't have had any effect if he didn't expose it. But those who do work under the government under duty despise that he broke this oath, essentially, if that's what it is.
Okay.
So
he signed a contract.
Yeah, he signed a contract, and it is a defense organization. So if this is a defense organization, he's under duty, we don't have to say what is good and bad. Sure, the NSA is bad, and I'm glad he did this, but that's not really the question. What does society do? Was he under duty? Was he a citizen? He's easy to let off if he's a citizen.
Okay, boy, you covered a lot of ground, but I take your point. It's a very important point. I think my only response would be, I'd have to think about it at greater length, is I'm not sure he sacrifices his citizenship simply because he's working as a contractor for the NSA. You're right. You're right. I mean, if I take your point correctly, he's not necessarily identically situated to you and me as people who don't work for contractors for the NSA. So. Right, so maybe he's not identically situated, but again, the flip side is, why does he give up his rights as a citizen just because he's doing that? And again, we're starting with the fact that he's violated the law. I mean, he's violated the law, and your point is that maybe he's made a bigger violation than other people would who are simply citizens, but we start there. I mean, he breached his contract, you know, so, okay, thank you. Good, very good points, folks, I appreciate it. If I ever, in my next book on Rawls, if I write about this, I will cite all of you. I don't know if that's going to happen. I got to live long enough to write this one, first of all. Yes, sir. What do you say?
Yeah, my name is Roy Elder, and I've been a member since 1969 of the Humanist. Two headlines, Unbreakable Security Code, and my own civil disobedience, which kind of penaled I went to prison. Anyway, what I want to explore on quickly is that I have an unbreakable code. The encryption is double encryption. It's equivalent to like a airlock in a satellite or in a submarine. It is supposedly, you can't even get in to effect, a file. And I've checked with the EEF, and they said you are, as of 2009, that you can do this. So I'm looking for somebody that would allow me to explore this in some company that makes an unbreakable break-in code for computers. So that's number one headline. The second headline is I broke the supposedly law in 1952, but I didn't think I broke it because I was legally able to work in a hospital, but my draft board said, no, you're not qualified because of such and such. So they were arbitrary and capricious. So when I went to court, the court was arbitrary and capricious. I got a sentence of 3 years, but I spent the year, just like you said that maybe Snowden 1 year, so but 2 more years on parole. The arbitrary and capricious went to this 9, what they call the appeals court number 9 in San Francisco. They said there was no situation. It went to the Supreme Court. They denied Carcieri, and so anyway, the whole thing was I didn't break the law really, but we had to fight arbitrary and capricious. In the second Supreme Court appeal from Muhammad Ali, if my case came up after that, I would have had no problem. So anyway, I think Snowden may approve of unbreakable code. I'd like to talk about that, and or would he go for a year like I did?
I'm not sure I completely understand
Can you make it short? There's a lot of questions. Yeah.
Okay, it's now okay. The lights. Oh, there we go. But it's red. But yeah, you can hear me.
That means the battery's going bad.
Insanity. Maybe that's it. Okay. All right. Let's see. Unbreakable. Oh, okay. I think it's actually working now.
Yeah, it's going to go dead.
Oh, okay.
All right. It's dying.
Okay. Thank you. All right. High-tech person that I am. Yes. I'm trying to understand, make sure I understand what you're saying. Unbreakable code. So you're suggesting that if that technology. Okay. If I do this, can you hear me in the back? Can I speak up? Okay, talk to you guys.
No, put the mic to your mouth so the video will capture it.
Hello. Oh, because they'll capture it. I got you. Okay. We're so high tech here. Okay. Unbreakable code that what? Such that the NSA could not collect this information, or? Well, sure. That sounds like a good idea. It sounds like that could have. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. 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 Yes. Yeah, I apologize. I'm having to, I try to avoid giving an answer to something before I understand the question, because, you know, and so I guess what you're saying is that this would have been a technological advance that could have solved some of this problem. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. The way I'm coming at it is, given what happened, and this is kind of the, from the viewpoint of civil disobedience analysis, given what happened, given what this guy did under these circumstances, what can we say? Was it morally defensible what he did? And so that's where I'm coming from, given what happened. So I'm kind of taking the facts as given. You know, as I said, Snowden himself said that he did this partly because he wanted to let other technologists know exactly what's going on so that they might develop perhaps the kind of technology you're talking about. So maybe in the future, that'll be part of the equation. But for right now, what Snowden did, we got the facts on the ground, we got to figure out, you know, what can we say about that? Was he, some people think he's a traitor, he should go to prison for the rest of his life. Other people think he's a hero, he should get that Nobel Prize, he should not even be tried, never mind convicted. So Yeah. Okay, somebody else, please.
All right, I'm taking the next. Let me just say, we have very little time left, so I'll make your questions short. The idea is to just get a bunch of issues out in the air and then follow on at the table, okay?
Okay, yes.
I think that a major part of the entire problem is the absence of a constitutional democratic society at the global level. We don't have a world parliament, a world courts of law, etc. And so there's the issues here. There's a question whether Snowden was acting. He might have been acting as a responsible world citizen. So he might be a traitor to the U.S., but not a traitor to humanity. Good. And it's an issue it isn't just a question of national security. What about global security? Yeah. So he could be acting as a responsible world citizen. Now, I want to ask the question: what is Rawls' view about this? Does Rawls think that we need a constitutional, democratic, global society?
Good question. I don't know that he spoke to that. He wrote a book in the 90s, one of his later books, called The Law of Peoples. And that's where he takes some of the principles that he had laid out in a theory of justice for the internal workings of a domestic society and tried to tease them out in the international realm. I must tell you, I've tried to read that book, and I wanted to end it all. International relations is very abstract as it is. When you take Rawls, who's fairly clear, but apply him to international relations, you want to end it all. Do you know what I mean? Anybody ever read Hegel? You know what I mean? You want to end it all. Okay. So you raise a very good question. People have been talking about world government for centuries, right? The great Immanuel Kant argued, I mean, in some detail about this as well. I don't think we're anywhere close to that. I suppose I wish that we were, but the kind of thing that you're talking about, citizenship of the world, you know, it's wonderful, but it seems so far away. In any case, it's beyond the scope of what I was doing here. Rawls's principles of civil disobedience are for the internal workings of domestic society. You know, if you're a citizen within that domestic society and it's violating the law, it's acting unjustly, what do you do? So maybe in a couple centuries, if we can somehow get a serious world government off the ground, maybe, you know, this question could be addressed a little bit better. You ready? Okay. Do you think so? That's a long... Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, fair enough. I think it's a long way off, but anyway. Thank you. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yes, I did my own presentation on Snowden not too long ago, and some of the things that you're missing, and you should watch some of Snowden's videos, especially his latest TED Talk that he did. Violating privacy is not the most important thing that he was protecting. You know, I know a lot of people talk about that, but the other thing that he's protecting is that the NSA deliberately and secretly weakened encryption standards so that they could break into anything that they wanted, which means that bad guys can break into anything they want too once they figure out that the encryption standards are weakened as well. So that basically put everything that the United States does in jeopardy. It basically created a single point of failure for the internet, where if somebody broke into the NSA, they would have the power of the NSA and they would have all the secrets of the NSA that they could use for criminal purposes. Those same encryption standards are used to protect our military. It's the nuclear launch codes and all this stuff that we need to keep secret, you know, from the bad guys. And one of the reasons that Snowden revealed what he revealed was because, you know, privacy was one of them, and everybody focuses on that, but there's many, many more serious, far more serious things that he's protecting than privacy. And the other thing is, as far as turning himself in, he's not done revealing stuff yet. The best is yet to come.
Okay, okay. Huh. Do you agree with my ultimate analysis, though? Because I think you and I agree that that key aspect of Rawls's, you know, theory, that what government is doing be very serious, like a violation of equal basic liberties. You don't disagree with me. That's covered. So you're with me there. Okay. Got it. Got it.
What he's doing is far more serious than what most people realize.
Okay.
And the justification is equal to the slavery thing. that it actually puts the entire internet in a position where the whole thing could be taken down worldwide because of the NSA. They created a single point of failure for the entire internet, and if the internet goes down, power systems goes down, phone systems go down, the entire system goes down that we're completely dependent on. It's that serious.
It sounds like you would not punish Snowden even for a year then. All right. Okay, a lot of people agree with you. Parade. Okay, that's a new one. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jerry Grass, I got 4 points. First, you talk about he violated the contract. Well, after World War II, the U.S. government was involved in prosecuting the Nazi officers for what they did. They basically believed that those guys had a moral imperative that was higher than whatever military oath they had agreed to. Number two, Congress did not know all about what NSA was doing. There were some Congress people who were shocked to find out some of what was being done.
I think the leadership knew.
Yeah, there was a few people, no, even some people on the Senate Intelligence Committee were surprised. Let's see, point number three, Ellsberg first took the Pentagon Papers to some members of Congress who did nothing to it, nothing with it. So that's why he took it to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all that. And finally, I'm one of those who believes that what Snowden did was a public service, and he should not go to jail. As to a trial, I don't know, but at least if he's in trial, he should be out on a personal recognizance. But I don't think he should go to jail at all.
And anybody who does the kind of thing that he does from now on should not be punished. There should be no legal repercussions.
What I'm saying is that he in this case performed a public service. I'm not going to make a general statement about in the future about just saying with all the facts that I know about this particular situation, he should not go to jail.
That he did a public service does not necessarily mean he should not be punished. Both could be true.
When you go around punishing people for their actions, that's going to dissuade them. There are a lot of people who probably like to give out information, but don't because they're afraid of the repercussions. The more you prosecute people, the more power the government has, and the more power they have to prevent information, good or bad, from getting out.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. I respect what you're saying. I think a lot of people agree with you. I'm not sure we're out of the woods on that.
All right, and it turns out that lunch is ready. I know there were more questions. Please take your questions to the speaker table, and let's thank Marty for a great talk.